I'm Kelsey. This is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I'm wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I'm doing one of my most exciting videos, I think, to make every year, but slightly differently this time. I have decided that this year, for 2020, instead of doing my most anticipated releases of the whole year at the beginning of the year, I'm going to do the thing where I split it up a bit. I'm not going to go seasonally like some people do, but I am going to split the year in half. So this video is my anticipated sci-fi and fantasy releases of January through June, and then come July, I'm committing myself then to doing another video that is going to be July through December. So that's making more work for me, which is why I haven't done it before. But it allows this to be a longer, more researched list of books, and then it gives a fair shot to everything that's going to publish later in the year that hasn't been announced yet or doesn't have its publication date pinned down yet. And yes, some of my very most anticipated releases of the year are already announced for the second half of 2020. I am aware that they exist. You're not going to see them in this video though. Now, there are several disclaimers that I'm going to put in the front of this video. First, the one that goes, I think, in pretty much everyone's anticipated releases lists, is that release dates are subject to change, covers are subject to change, titles might be pulled entirely. It has happened with books that have appeared on my anticipated lists before. The second disclaimer that I want to give that is specific to me and my channel and how I do anticipated releases videos is that I want to be very clear up front that just because a book is on this list is not a commitment from me that I will actually get to it, that I will read it in the course of this coming year, or that I will ever read it. If they get crappy early reviews, I might give some of these books a pass. Some of these I just might not have the time to get to. 2019, for example, was a year where I got to very few new releases during the year. It could happen again. And I do err on the side of inclusion when I make these videos. If I'm on the fence about whether to put a book in or not, I'm gonna put it in, because what I want my anticipated releases videos to be is a resource for you, operating under the assumption that you, someone who presumably has some interest in my taste in books, may want to benefit from some of my research and some of the upcoming releases that have caught my attention. And even if I don't get around to reading that book, maybe you will, and it will be your next favorite thing. And because I'm splitting the year in half this year, I'm erring even more on the side of inclusion. So this list is still gonna be a pretty long list. There are, I think, 23 books on this list, and you're gonna get another pretty long list for me partway through the year. Now, the first book that I have on my list for January is one that was actually initially announced for last year and got pushed back. This is Lady Hotspur by Tessa Gratton, which comes out from Tor Books on January 7th. This is a companion novel set in the same world as The Queens of Innis Lear, but I think several centuries later. While The Queens of Innis Lear was an epic fantasy King Lear retelling, this promises to be a Henry IV retelling that gender bends some of the main characters. I enjoyed The Queens of Innis Lear. I did a full review of it, which I can link for you. I am a little nervous though right now because the early Goodreads reviews on this one are pretty mixed, both from people who read and liked Queens of Innis Lear and people who didn't. But I definitely still have my eye on this one. Next, the second of 3 books that I have actually on this list for the same date, January 7th, is The Night Country by Melissa Albert from Flatiron Books. Now, this is a young adult title, and it's a sequel to The Hazel Wood, which, again, I also read and reviewed. I can link my review. The Hazel Wood was a dark, contemporary, fairy tale infused fantasy novel. I thought it worked pretty well as a standalone when I read it, and I had some trepidation about the idea of a sequel, but still definitely on my radar. Melissa Albert was a debut author with The Hazel Wood, and the writing in that book was so pleasantly strong for a debut. And then the third book I have on my list for January 7th, coming right up here, is another young adult fantasy title, this one itself a debut. This is Woven in Moonlight by Isabel Ibañez. This is going to be from Page Street Books, and it caught my attention initially because, oh my gosh, look at this cover. And then I read some more about it and learned that it's inspired by Bolivian history. This promises to be a story with gods and revolution, and I believe the main character has a magical ability to weave fabric from moonlight. YA debuts can be very underwhelming for me. I'm always looking for the ones that promise something new and different and bold, and this one has caught my attention. Next, on January 14th, from Fywell and Friends, is a book that I know I'm going to read because I know this author is a win for me, another young adult title. This is Dark and Deepest Red by Anna Marie McLemore. McLemore is one of my favorite young adult authors, possibly one of my favorite authors. Yes, one of my favorite authors. Their books have beautiful writing and magical realist atmosphere, usually lots of queer and Latinx representation as well. And this one combines a historical fiction narrative with the story of the Red Shoes. And this is the first book on this list where I can 100% guarantee you, yes, I'm pre-ordering it, yes, I will read it. No questions about that. And then the next book on this list is the only one that I already have an arc of, so I know I'm going to be reading this one too. This is Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi. This is a novella from Tor.com. It's coming out on January 21st, and I got an arc of this from Book Expo. I believe this is a story set in a dystopian future America that also has elements of fantasy in it. It's about structural racism and the Black American experience, and focuses on two siblings who apparently have some sort of supernatural power. Another Tor.com novella coming out on February 4th is Upright Women Wanted by Sarah Gailey, which is another Western story from the same author who brought us the American Hippo books, River of Teeth and Taste of Marrow. But this is not the same alternate American West as those books. This seems to be a future Wild West. And the line from the book description that's got everyone excited about this one is Queer Librarian Spies on Horseback. Next is going to be the only middle grade book on my list, which I think has less to do with any lack of enthusiasm for middle grade on my part, or any lack of new middle grade releases for me to be enthusiastic about, and more to do with the fact that I am not as in the loop with what is forthcoming to be published in middle grade as I am in adult and YA. But this will be the UK release of Hollowpox: The Hunt for Morrigan Crow, the third Nevermore book on February 6th from Orion Children's Books. Now, I did choose to include this one on this list, even though here in the United States, we won't get it until August 18th from Little Brown with this cover, because I know a bunch of you will be getting your hands on it in February. I've enjoyed the first two books in this series about Morrigan Crow. For me, they are definitely quick, fun reads. I am a little nervous that the description of this book sounds a bit like a rehash of some of the plot elements from book 2, but I remain hopeful. On February 11th from Tor.com is Stormsong by C.L. Polk, the sequel to Witchmark, the second book in a series that's now being called The Kingston Cycle. I have a review of Witchmark on this channel. I'm going to link it. That was a novel-length book from Tor.com. I'm assuming this will be as well. Witchmark seamlessly fused queer romance, murder mystery, and magical high society intrigue in an imaginative, semi-Edwardian-ish fantasy world. While Witchmark's protagonist was a doctor named Miles, Stormsong's protagonist is his high society sister, Grace. Grace was not always a likable character in book 1. She came around by the end, but did some pretty not great things along the way. So I'm hoping for some killer character work in this one. Next, on March 3rd from Sourcebooks, Fire is another young adult title from an author who is far from being a debut author at this point, but whose previous work I've not been interested in reading. And this is Wicked As You Wish by Rin Chupeco. Rin Chupeco is probably best known at this point for the Bone Witch series, which had necromancy and stuff. Mostly I've thought that her books sounded too dark and creepy for me, which is why I stayed away from them. But The Bone Witch and its sequel were definitely loved by a lot of people who read them. And this sounds fascinating, let me tell you about it. This is a contemporary fantasy set in an alternate magical United States that is ruled by a monarchy, and it focuses on immigration issues from a Filipino perspective. According to the author on Twitter, part of the world building of this book is that fairy tales in this world are real actual history, and I am sold. Next, on March 17th from Tor.com is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, who has, I believe, self-published a lot of LGBTQ books, both contemporary and fantasy. If the page count on Goodreads for this one is correct, it's going to be a novel, not a novella, but I don't really know. Anyhow, this is one that first jumped out at me because of the cover, and then I read the description and I thought, oh yes, I want to read that. This is about a man who is a caseworker for the department in charge of magical youth, who is sent on an assignment to an island orphanage, and about both the children who live there and their caretaker. It seems like a found family story and a romance, and again, beautiful cover. Next, on March 17th, another Tor.com book. This one I'm pretty sure is a novella, but one that I'm a little perplexed by. I don't really know what it is. I don't know what to expect from it. And this is Hearts of Oak by Eddie Robson, who I believe is best known for his television work that I'm not at all familiar with. This promises to be comedic, which is why it's on this list. I really like comedic SFF, but beyond that, I really can't figure out much about it. The description promises a very strange city and a talking cat. It all sounds very fantasy to me, but on the Tor.com website, they've classified this as science fiction. So I'm a little puzzled, but also very intrigued. And wow, so much Tor.com, because here's another one. This is The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nghi, and it comes out on March 24th. And again, wow, look at the cover. Tor.com is doing such a good job with the covers of their books. This is about an empress's rise to power told from the perspective of her handmaiden, and the description says that it's about empire storytelling and the anger of women. Next is a book that I'm sure is showing up on nearly every genre fan's anticipated releases list this year, and that is The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, which is coming out from Orbit on March 26th. This is a contemporary urban fantasy set in the same version of New York that her short story, The City Born Great, was set in. I remember loving that short story. This is going to be so different from her previous books, but I'm sure it's going to be so, so good. Next, on April 7th from Tor Books is The Glass Magician by Caroline Stevermer. Now, the only thing I've read of Stevermer's was Sorcery and Cecilia, which she co-wrote with Patricia C. Reedy. So I really don't know what her writing is like on its own. But this is an adult historical fantasy set in turn-of-the-century New York with high society and some people who have the magical ability to shapeshift into different animals. The main character is a stage magician, and this just ticks so many boxes for me. I'm super curious about it. Now, you may remember that earlier in this video, I had one book on this list that was the UK release of a book that wouldn't be out in the US until later in the year. This is the reverse. This is the US release of a book that came out in 2019 in the UK. That is Deeplight by Frances Hardinge. Now, I was less impressed with her most recent release, A Skinful of Shadows, shadows than I was by her previous book, which was The Lie Tree. But my favorite book of hers that I've read is A Face Like Glass, which is, unlike those two historical fiction books, a secondary world fantasy. I believe this is also a secondary world fantasy, so I'm hoping that I'm going to like it as much as I like A Face Like Glass. I'm hoping it has some of that same bonkers world building. The American edition of this is out on April 14th from Amulet Books, whereas it was released on October 31st already in the UK. I have to admit though, this is one where I might cave and order myself the UK edition off Book Depository for this cover, even though it wouldn't match my American editions of all her other books. It is just so gorgeous, and I kind of want it, and I could get it sooner that way, so I'm very tempted. But anyways, Hardinge's books tend to fall on a sort of spectrum from middle grade to YA. This one seems more YA to me. It apparently has to do with terrifying underwater gods that are long dead, or are they? Next, on April 21st, from Harper Voyager, we have Race to the Sands by Sarah Beth Durst, which is a standalone high fantasy, which is how I like my high fantasy. I like them standalones. Durst is well known for both her middle grade and YA books, but I've actually only ever read her adult series, the Queens of Renthia books. And I find her writing to be entertaining and easy to read when you need that sort of fantasy adventure. Next, on May 5th from Tor.com is another one that's on absolutely everyone's anticipated lists, and this is Network Effect by Martha Wells, the Murderbot novel that's a sequel novel to the 4-book Murderbot novella series. I honestly don't have much more to say about this. This is Murderbot and more of it. What's not to like? I heard Martha Wells read from this at Worldcon. I am so excited. Next is another book that I heard the author read from at Worldcon this year, even though at the time it did not have a release date or even a title. But this is Phoenix Extravagant by Yoon Lee, which is coming out on June 9th from Solaris. This is obviously a placeholder cover. We don't have a full cover yet. While Yoon Lee's previous books have been science fiction, this is fantasy set in a world inspired by Korea under colonial rule. And this is about a painter whose work sends them in search of the source of a pigment, and somehow what they find is much bigger than they expected. Next, on June 23rd from Tor.com is another novella, The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water by Zen Cho. What a title, what a cover. I heard Zen Cho talk about this a little bit on a panel at Worldcon, but I've kind of forgotten what she said about it. I was interested though. This is a wuxia-inspired fantasy set in, I think, a historical 1950s setting, and that's basically what I know about it. On June 23rd from Tor Books, we have The Angel of the Crows by Catherine Addison. Addison is a pen name for Sarah Monette. She wrote The Goblin Emperor as her first book under this pen name, which was a book that I absolutely loved. I think the planned companion novel to The Goblin Emperor is still slated, possibly for some time later in 2020, although we don't have an exact date yet. This one is a historical fantasy set in an alternate 19th century London. It seems to have some paranormal elements, but the thing that makes me nervous is that this has something to do with Jack the Ripper, and I'm a little scared of Jack the Ripper stories, but I'm gonna see what reviews are like, and I might give this a shot. And then the last book on this list is another one that I'm a little bit nervous about because of what I don't really know about it yet, but this is another author I just have my eye on what she writes, and this is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This comes out on June 30th from Del Rey. This is, as the title promises, a Mexican Gothic set in the 1950s in Mexico. A woman goes to a creepy house and meets the people who live there. This is all very Gothic. What I don't know is what the speculative element of this is. I know there must be one because it's published by Del Rey, which is an SFF publisher. But the book's description doesn't give many hints. And in like one tweet on Twitter, the author described this book as horror. And depending on how horror it is, I might have to skip it. Anyhow, that's it. That's my list. I find it amusing that I so often am filming as the sun sets and it gets darker and darker outside as I film. Today I was filming in the morning as the sun rose and now it's oh so bright. Anyhow, let me know down below if you're also looking forward to any of these books. If there's anything else you're very excited about that's coming out in January through June of 2020. Anyhow, I hope you're having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.